I've learned that a lot of haunted battlefields are products of the Civil War.
A lot of World War I, World War II as well, at least on my list. I'm interested to hear yours.
Yeah.
Ghosts of war are everywhere, and it's really no surprise. It makes sense. If any place is going to be haunted, it's probably going to be the site of a major battle.
Yeah,
right?
where like a crap ton of people died. So let's get into it.
And we start off at the site of the deadliest battle in the American Civil War, Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. The Battle of Gettysburg raged for 3 days between July 1st and July 3rd of 1863. Over 50,000 soldiers died here. Well, today Gettysburg is said to be haunted by the soldiers who met their end there. The site of the battle is, of course, said to have the most activity. It's said that on some nights you can still hear the ghostly sounds of war, like cannon blasts and screams echoing through the field, and ghostly apparitions have been seen wandering about. These soldiers are often referred to as the Phantom Regiment. But other spots in town are said to be haunted as well. In fact, Gettysburg is often said to be one of the most haunted towns in the United States. There's said to be ghostly activity at the Farnsworth House Inn and the Gettysburg Hotel. Sachs Bridge is said to be haunted by the spirits of 3 hanged Confederate deserters. The list goes on, and the second most haunted area, aside from the battlefield, would have to be the Gettysburg National Cemetery.
Next on our list, we've got the Antietam's battlefield located on Antietam Creek near the small town of Sharpsburg in Maryland. Another incredibly deadly battle that took place during the Civil War. The casualty number, although not as high as Gettysburg's, is still staggering. On September 17th of 1862, 23,100 men were either wounded, killed, or went missing in action in what is now known as BLOODY Lane. If you were to walk the lane today, you would notice that something is missing. Sound. The lane is said to have a church-like quietness that those who visit find to be incredibly eerie. But not only that, according to eyewitnesses, the former battleground is also haunted, which is why it's on this list. If you listen close enough through the quiet, you can still hear the sounds of weapons firing, and the smell of weapons powder is said to linger in the air. Others who have visited the grounds have claimed to have seen the deceased soldiers who they first believed to be reenactors. They were so real until they vanished right into thin air.
Next up, we have the haunting of an entire village, Passchendaele in Belgium, where the Battle of Passchendaele took place in World War I. World War I was gruesome. It was mostly all trench warfare, so soldiers were living in terrible conditions, and it was this transitional time in warfare where you had longer range weapons and bombs, but things would also get up close and personal as well. It was just a horrific war, and the Battle of Passchendaele had a huge death toll, with over 400,000 casualties on all sides, about a quarter of which were never identified. The battlefield was an absolute mess. Heavy rain turned the soil into thick mud, making it hard to navigate, and there were craters full of corpses all over the battlefield. Eventually, though, the Allies took the win. The ghosts of that battle are still said to linger in Passchendaele to this day, with the sounds of battle still heard on occasion.
Next up, we've got the Chickamauga battlefield, home to the second deadliest battle of the Civil War, with a total of 16,170 Union and 18,454 Confederate casualties, culminating in a total death toll of 34,624. Today, the battlefield has become the Chickamauga and Chattanooga National Military Park, and it is home to much more than history. The park is home to at least 3 regularly recurring ghosts, the most famous being Old Green Eyes, a green-eyed apparition believed to be the ghost of a former soldier whose eyes were laid to rest after his body was destroyed in battle. He now roams the park looking for the rest of his remains. The second ghost to haunt the grounds is the Lady in White. I feel like there's always a lady in white. She's said to roam in and out of graves looking for her husband who died during the battle. And the third ghost known to frequent the grounds is the Headless Horseman, not just a character on Scooby-Doo, believe it or not. The Headless Horseman is the alleged ghost of Lieutenant Colonel Julius Koresh, whose head was removed from his body by a cannonball and then trampled by horses during the battle. Pretty rough. He now roams the grounds, most likely similarly to Old Green Eyes, looking for his missing piece, which is a Shel Silverstein reference for those who get that.
Now we head to the Somme River in France, the site of the deadliest battle in World War I. Over 1 million soldiers died in the Battle of the Somme, which lasted from July to November of 1916. The Somme is also famous for being the first battle where tanks were used. Soldiers described the time they first saw the tanks rolling into battle as horrifying, rolling over everything in their path. Now, the plan was to break through German lines and gain ground, hastening the victory for the Allies, but it wouldn't be easy. This battle was sheer hell, and by the end of it all, the Allies had gained some ground, but at an enormous cost. With all the horror this area saw over the course of those 4 months, it's no surprise that there's said to be this lingering presence of death left behind. People will claim to see ghostly figures of wounded soldiers crying out into the night, only to vanish into thin air, the sounds of artillery fire echoing across the river, and the ghostly rumbling of marching feet are also sometimes heard.
Next up, we have the battlefield at Harpers Ferry in West Virginia, which is actually said to be the most haunted place in West Virginia. The battle at Harpers Ferry, like many others on this list, took place during the Civil War. During the battle, at least 13,000 soldiers were killed in combat, and many others died during raids and of illness during the 6 years of active combat that took place in the town. The battlegrounds themselves are said to be haunted by dead soldiers, but the entire town is said to be haunted by those who met their unfortunate fates at the time, including the St. Peter's Roman Catholic Church, which was the site of an incredibly gruesome raid. The hospital is said to be haunted as well by a rather vengeful soldier who died of his injuries after nurses refused to tend to him because they believed that he wasn't in any immediate danger. They were wrong, his life ended, and they spent the rest of theirs being tormented by the man's ghost, who is still said to roam the area to this day.
The Battle of Stalingrad was a major turning point in the Second World War, and also one of the single deadliest battles in history, with over 2 million casualties on both sides. The fighting was intense, both sides dug in and fought street by street, building by building. The Germans bombarded the city with artillery and airstrikes, and by the end, the city had mostly been reduced to rubble. The battle raged on for over 6 months, but in the end, it was the Soviets who came out on top. They encircled the German 6th Army, cutting off their supply lines and forcing them to surrender in February of 1943. Stalingrad is called Volgograd today, and pretty much the entire city is said to be haunted. Residents have claimed to hear phantom gunfire, ghostly figures in World War II uniforms wandering the streets. There are also plenty of stories of people seeing ghostly apparitions in their very own homes.
Next up, we've got the good old haunted Fort Jackson, located in good old Louisiana. The fort, whose construction began in 1822 and was occupied by 1833, was declared a military ground in 1842 by executive order of John Tyler, the president at the time, and it was controlled by the Confederacy. From there, it became the battleground of the 1862 battle between the Union and the Confederacy, started by the Union in the hopes of gaining control of New Orleans. The battle lasted just 12 days, but cost the lives of about 1,011 soldiers. The Union won and went on to use the fort as a prison, which later during World War I was turned into a training ground for soldiers. But no matter what it was turned into, the permanent residents of Fort Jackson never left their forever home. Deceased Confederate soldiers are said to roam the halls of the failed fort, in which they were ambushed by the Union, sometimes aimlessly and sometimes marching in formation. Those who have visited the landmark have also reported hearing weapons fire and smelling their smoking powder. And of course, there is also the ghost of a young woman who roams the grounds, wandering aimlessly and singing mournfully before vanishing into thin air. There's always a sad woman.
The Battle of Culloden put an end to the Jacobite Rising on April 16, 1746. Scottish Highlanders rushed into battle against the government forces, who mowed them down with musket fire before the two armies finally clashed. The entire battle lasted less than an hour though, with the victory going to the British government force led by the Duke of Cumberland. It's said that on the anniversary of the battle, the dead returned to the battlefield to fight again, with the sound of clashing metal and musket fire ringing through the air. One story goes that in 1936, a woman lifted a tartan cloth that was laid out on one of the burial mounds, only to catch a glimpse of a wounded Highlander underneath, who then vanished into thin air.
And finally, we have yet another Civil War battlefield, this time located at Pea Ridge, Arkansas, now the Pea Ridge National Military Park. On March 6 of 1862, a total of 26,800 Confederate and Union soldiers met on the battlefield, the Confederates outnumbering the Unionists by about 6,000. An advantage, sure, but the Unionists were being led by a war-tested general. Just 2 days after the battle began, the Confederate forces became tired and their spirits dropped. That day the Union claimed their victory, but not before 3,400 men had already lost their lives on the battlefield due to handheld weapons fire, bayonets, and cannon fire. Many of the soldiers had been young men at the time of their death, whose hopes of a long, prosperous life after the battle were taken from them in the 2 days of combat. Those who visit the battlefield today report seeing apparitions of the men in the distance, feeling as though they are being followed, and hearing the men's shouts along with the sounds of rigorous cannon fire.
It's intense stuff.
It's a whole lot of history for you.
It is.
Yeah.
Well, we hope you enjoyed this history and ghost lesson.
Yes.
And yeah, we'll catch you guys in the next one.
That we will. I've been your host, Anna Thompson.
I've been your host, James.
See you in the next one.